Folks, welcome to Disciple Dojo. I'm excited because our friend Dr. Matthew Thomas is back with us for this episode. If you don't know, Matt was one of the contributors to, along with his wife Leanne, to the Ignatius Catholic Study Bible. He is one of my favorite Catholics. He's probably my favorite Catholic at this point. And so I love just getting to sit and chat and nerd out. In this episode, we talked all about Josephus and Maccabees, why this stuff matters, why it's important. We talk a little bit about Protestantism and Catholicism and the commonalities and the differences. And it's just a great discussion. We talked for, over 2.5 hours. So I think we're going to break it up. I'm going to release it in 2 parts. So here is part 1 of my discussion with Dr. Matthew Thomas. Folks, we are back. You have asked for it. You have clamored for it. You have lit up the comments begging that we have Dr. Matthew Thomas back in the dojo. So I got him. I made it happen. Matt, how are you? It's good to see you, man.
I'm doing awesome. I just want to say we had a little shout out to the trolls last time, and said we're gonna take the comment box trolls into consideration. And I just want to say, in complimenting your audience, there was actually proportionally very few trolls. I had a look at some of the comments on the the episode that we put up and a couple of the other ones that you've been doing. And I mean, granted it's the internet, but man, you've got a lot of really, really thoughtful listeners.
Yeah,
and folks, just genuinely, insightful, really appreciative of the stuff that you're doing. And so I actually, you don't often go into a comment box and come out, edified. But man, I really was. I was blessed by hearing from, what your listeners, had to say and some of the thoughts and reflections they had. So anyway, tough to not come back when you feel appreciated, like that. So thank you, trolls.
Yeah, that's what makes them stand out is they're not the norm. And so when I do get comments by people, either they clearly didn't watch the video or they came to have an argument about something that is not in the video, and those stick out because most of our viewers are actually pretty sane and they're probably suave, but savvy people, and they can handle this stuff. So I agree. I love our dojo viewers. I think we're like right on the cusp of 50,000 subscribers. We're at like 49,100 and something. So your job is to get us over the hump, man. You got to beat the bushes and get all the Catholics.
That's honestly, it's one of the things that I've really been encouraged by is seeing so many Catholics get exposed to what you're doing. And I think, again, that kind of, collaboration is it's just so good for all of us. And so anyway, hopefully we can think of some really spicy things to say on here that'll make it really, really clickbaity and viral so that you can get over the hump. I'll try to think of something controversial.
and at some point just make a weird face and then I can freeze that and use that as the thumbnail, and then put like Catholic scholar owns YouTuber or something like that.
Oh man,
destroys. We'll use the word destroys.
Jesus will be really, really impressed by that, I'm sure.
Yeah, he loves that stuff. Well, listen, okay, so here's why you're here. Folks are probably wondering, other than because we just enjoy hanging out and chatting. We have been doing a series here at Disciple Dojo where I am going through the Olivet Discourse, and we've started we did a big picture overview of like comparing, this is how Mark does it, this is how Matthew does it, this is how Luke does it, and I color coded so people could see the different structures. And then we zeroed in on, then we took a detour and said, okay, now let's take Matthew's version because it's the most Jewish, and let's compare it to another Jewish author of the time, Josephus. So we compared Matthew's version with Josephus's account of 70 AD. And then since then, we've been kind of drilling down deep into Mark. So what I wanted to have you on is because there's a nice convergence with what we've been doing here at Disciple Dojo, which is the Olivet Discourse, and with two areas that you are very familiar with, and that's Josephus and Maccabees. So we're going to talk about those in this episode. And folks, you have to have seen the review we've done of the Catholic Study Bible. Like, it's the only study Bible I've done. Actually, it's not the only one. I've done multiple of the NIV Archaeological Study Bible. This is the only non-Protestant. This is the only Catholic Study Bible for sure that I've done multiple episodes on.
Is there anyone that you've done more episodes on than this one?
No, it's in you guys are at the front of the pack. I've done 2 on the Life Application and 2 on the NIV Archaeological, which is out of print. So yeah, you guys are leading the way. Tell Scott that I think he gave us a shout out. He was on there's a show, Leela Rose, is that a name? A Catholic podcaster?
I think so. I don't know these worlds very well, but that sounds right.
I feel like there's some lady named Leela Rose, and he was on her show, and he said something about that I had done, rave reviews about this Catholic Study Bible. He didn't go in depth on it, but a viewer told me like, "Hey, you got mentioned on this." So I thought that was pretty neat in that world.
Yeah,
but
just getting more subscribers.
Yeah, right. Gotta bring them over. Bring them to the dojo. So Josephus and Maccabees. You've done the study notes for First and Second Maccabees in the Catholic Study Bible. I have skimmed First Maccabees. I read the introduction when I reviewed it, and I've skimmed First Maccabees. I did a deep dive on Second Maccabees over the past month. So I'm going to pick your brain a little bit about those. But first, let's start closest to the time of the New Testament and Jesus let's start with Josephus. Josephus is a name that gets thrown around a lot in discussion. And it's a name that, and I used to do this too. I used to pretend I knew what people were talking about when really I was like, I don't actually know who Josephus is. I know he's important, and I know I should know. And I know when people quote him, that means something. But that was about as far, until I went to seminary, that was about my understanding. So for viewers that are in that space, why don't you give us a brief introduction to Josephus in whatever way you want? Who is he? Why does he matter?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got into this and was really in the exact same position, as you described, in that, when you're doing doing graduate work in biblical studies, you always come across Josephus's name and say, hey, he's this first century historian. He fought in the Jewish War. He was around for the events of 70 AD, et cetera. So you kind of know some of the basics. And usually what you end up doing is you end up looking up 1 or 2 passages as they relate to your research.
Right.
And then making claims about it and saying, hey, Josephus says this or Josephus says this.
Yeah.
Most folks don't end up getting a whole lot farther than that. And so what's challenging is from a standpoint of New Testament scholarship, and actually Old Testament scholarship as well. You get all of these claims, and you get folks saying, "Hey, Josephus says this. Josephus says this. Josephus says this." Sometimes those claims will be like at odds with one another, and you kind of get the sense that nobody really knows exactly what they're talking about. And I found that I, being a good New Testament scholar, was doing the exact same thing, and that I was quoting the parts of Josephus that I was familiar with, and then not actually really being familiar with his writings in depth. And so this is a few years ago. As for this book I've been working on for Saint Vladimir's for a number of years on First and Second Clement, there is scholars making a bunch of claims about, hey, Josephus says this about the temple, and basically the claim is that he talks about the temple as if it's still standing, so that you wouldn't know based on what he's saying that he's writing after the destruction of the temple.
Yeah,
that seems a little strange, but I don't really know how to test this claim besides to read through the entirety of Josephus's writings. And then I looked at the size of Josephus's writings, and you can see here's my addition. Here's the thickness of it.
Yeah, it's not light reading.
Here's the font size you're looking at. There's a lot of words in here, and so it's like, gosh, I can see why nobody does this, but I couldn't really think of an alternative on how to actually be able to test these claims without reading through, not just the Jewish War, but the entirety of Josephus's writings. So I took a summer and I read through the entirety of Josephus,
Mm.
and I absolutely loved it. I started with his Antiquities, which is Josephus's basically retelling of the story of the Jewish scriptures, beginning with Adam, and then taking you up not just to to Malachi or to the Maccabees, but up to basically his present day, taking you up through Herod the Great and everything that transpired around them. So that's 20 books. It's long, but it's good. And as far as if you want to, I mean, the way I describe it basically is it's like you're getting to go to the Bible study of a first century Pharisee, which is actually fantastic.
Yeah.
And if you want to get a sense of, we talk, Romans 11, we're sort of weird Gentile olive branches and we're grafted into the tree of Israel.
Yeah.
But if you really want to get a sense of how true that is, read, the 20 books of the Antiquities. You're going to see, for a first century, Pharisee, the way that they're interpreting scripture, so similar to what, we do now 2,000 years later. Obviously, you're going to have little, points of difference and distinction here and there, but so much of it you just recognize is like, gosh, this is just really good, theologically astute reading of the Old Testament. And so it's really encouraging, I think, edifying to see how, thoughtful, believers in the God of Israel have been reading these texts and applying them, to their lives for, millennia now. So that's the 20 books of the Antiquities. You have the 7 books of the Jewish War, probably the most popular stuff that Josephus writes, and I think rightly so. As far as the stuff that Jesus is talking about, in the passages that you've been focusing on, so Mark 13, Matthew 24, and then saying, hey, what actually happens historically? What does this look like in real life? Yeah. You have more in Josephus than you possibly know what to do with, to be able to fill in every single detail of that. It's just riveting reading. There's books of it that are, and you by the end of it, you just want to make a movie. You're like, how come nobody's made a movie of this yet? Right. It's incredible. And so from a standpoint of New Testament interpretation, extremely, extremely helpful. And then you have his writings, you have his autobiography, which is, a good overview of his life. And then his 2 books against Appian, which are a Jewish apologetic and, a defense of what it is that Jews believe against one of the Gentile detractors. And what's great is that everything that he's saying in defense of the Jewish faith, 99% of it still holds up as a defense of of Christianity as well, because again, this is what we're grafted into. Right. And you see how so many of the same charges against faith in general, against faith, the God of Israel in particular, how many of those charges stay the same over time, and how good the responses have been from somebody like Josephus. Again, going back 2,000 years, how relevant some of that that same material is. And so I went through the entirety of his writings, and I found not just answers to the question that I was looking for, but I found more than I knew what to do with. And so I immediately went and talked to our academic dean over here. So for those of you who don't know, I teach at the Dominican School of Philosophy and Theology here in Berkeley, and floated the idea of putting together a seminar where we're going to read through the entirety of Josephus's writings. And so I've now had a chance to, I finished teaching this for the second time now. And so taking students through, again, all of this, which is ambitious. There's a lot. It's not really for the faint of heart. But man, what you come out with in the end is just absolutely fantastic. Yeah. And I think the insights that you have into reading the Old Testament, the appreciation for all kinds of details of the historical context of the New Testament that you might not have seen, and what the significance of Jesus's words would have been, when he's saying these things in the Olivet Discourse. Well, gosh, if he says that this is all going to happen before this generation passes away, what happened within that generation? Like, what are the things that actually took place? Yeah. You don't have to guess. You have all of it in as more detail than you know what to do with. And then I think theologically, the way that I mean, reading Josephus is a great way to put additional nails in Marcion's coffin, as
Mm,
far as sealing the fact that we as these weird Gentiles, we really are grafted in, and we are grafted in, to no other story, to no other God than the God who created the world and who called Israel in the beginning, who
yeah.
calls all of us now. And you've probably seen this with Marcion. He seems to rise from the dead every
I
generation.
was gonna say Marcion's coffin needs to be nailed shut every day
Yeah.
because it keeps opening, and
Yep.
people keep. For those viewers who don't know, Marcion was a heretic and a literal heretic in the early church, who taught that the God of Israel was different than Jesus and the true God, and the God of Israel was this demiurge who had created, and that played into matter being bad and the creation being bad, and but he discarded the entirety of the Hebrew Bible and even a lot of the New Testament that depended on the Hebrew Bible, and he came up with this like you, Marcion is who when people use the term replacement theology, like that's what I think.
Yeah.
Marcion was replacement theology, legitimately replacement
Yeah.
theology. Everything else up to him is petty compared to what he did. But as an Old Testament teacher, primarily, Marcion is. I've had to wrestle with the ghost of Marcion for 20 years.
Oh yeah. If your focus area is Pauline studies, like mine is, you realize that the ghost of Marcion is really around every corner,
Yeah.
particularly when you start to get into some German, academic theological context.
Yes.
And so anyway, so this is, if to switch analogies from zombies to ghosts, but if you're trying to exercise the spirit of Marcion, the works of Josephus are very effective for
Yeah.
performing that exorcism.
Yeah.
I think it's good. It's an exorcism. I think
Maybe we'll use a
probably.
Ghostbusters analogy and have like the streams,
Yeah.
Marcion and being pulled down. The
No, I
Josephus is
think
the stream that's being shot at him like the Ghostbusters.
yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right. I think that's absolutely right. I love Ghostbusters growing up as well, so that
Who
goes a
didn't,
long
of
way with
course.
me. I'll say two other.
Wait. Let me ask you real quick
Yeah, go ahead.
before you get too deep. When you read through that summer, did you read through in Greek or English?
I was reading through in English.
Okay, so what and there different translations available in Josephus in English? Is that big volume you have the best one, the main one?
Yeah. So
What
this
should
is
people
the
do?
this is the William Whiston translation. It's been updated a little bit by Paul Meyer. So he takes some of the language, updates it, a little bit here and there. I think as far as getting started with Josephus, if you actually want to read through Josephus, it's great to start with because it's open source online. It's everywhere. And when it is being cited, this is the one that's being cited most often. And so it's a great starting spot. And I think he actually does a good job. I think as a translator, even though that we're going back to the 1700s, he does a good job of sticking to the Greek. And so generally speaking, when you go back and you open up the Greek, you're not going to find something that's totally different from what he was doing. He tends to be pretty literal, fairly wooden, but in a way that I think is overall a virtue rather than a vice. You have on Verbum, so logos, the logos equivalent. I have the Thackeray translation as well, which is from about, this goes back to 100 years ago, maybe. So more recent. And that's also a good, even more updated translation. So if you have access to that, by all means, go for it. If all you have is Whiston, I think Whiston's great. I have all my notes on this particular one. And I think it really is, I think, a testament to how good of a translation, it was originally that.
Yeah. Do you know if there's a reader's edition at all, or is it all the reference editions? Do you know?
So a reader's edition, like
paragraphed and single column and like a book edition versus double column form, reference book format.
Yeah. So the challenge is fitting all of it into one volume, which is why you've got this big old double column thing. Because it's just challenging to fit it in there. So there are a couple of other printings of it out. I think from my standpoint, because I think it's so valuable to read the entirety of his writings, it's hard for me to not recommend to just get this one, because that way then you've got all of your notes, all of everything in one place. And I mean, for me too, I'm a guy where I listen to stuff a lot, so I use the online stuff and just put it on text to speech and just took notes as I'm shooting a basketball or do something like that. Or that for me, I'm able to get through more text that way, because we've just got we've got so many kids in the house. Me and my wife have 4 kids, and the reading time, being able to to sit and actually be working on a book is pretty limited. But if I can put my headphones on and just listen to the text by text to speech, I got a lot better chance of getting through a lot of content this way.
Your kids don't read Josephus to you? What are you doing, man?
It's funny actually. We're going through. My kids love the Action Bible, and so my daughter Cammie has read through it a bunch of times, and then Raphael is reading through it right now also. And he just got through the part of the Action Bible where it doesn't tell you this, but it's actually drawing on Josephus's Antiquities. And so the person who's doing it, he gives you a little bit of Maccabees, and then he gives you a bit of Alexander the Great coming through, and he actually comes into Judea. He's going to attack Judea because he's Alexander the Great, and he attacks places. And then he has this dream vision thing, and he sees this guy, and it's this sort of priestly figure or something like that, and he's telling him to do stuff. And then he goes up to Judea, and the high priest comes down, and it's the guy he saw in the dream. And the high priest is like, "Hey, I think I know you. I think that Daniel was talking about you." And Alexander's like, "Whoa, I had this dream, and I saw you, and you were wearing these same clothes, and we should be friends. I'm not going to destroy you guys." And so you have all of this. Action Bible guys aren't making it up. They're getting it straight out of Josephus, actually.
Yeah.
And, so anyway, if you have read the Action Bible, you've actually read some of Josephus already without knowing it.
That's awesome. Well, let me ask you this. How trustworthy is Josephus overall, historically? Because that's been a question that some people have had is, I mean, he fought against Rome, and then he wrote, and then he became friends with Rome and started writing. So there's questions about that, and I think they're fair questions. Where do you land?
Yeah. I think so. I think the first thing to do is because we talk about this in our Josephus seminar. The part of what we're doing in this particular class is we're trying to basically there's a spiritual discipline. It's also a natural discipline as well. It's called listening. It's kind of an old-fashioned thing. We tend to not do it a whole lot anymore.
I'm sorry, what? I wasn't paying attention. Say that. What?
Really into talking, really into passing judgment on stuff. We're not super good at listening. It's one of those kind of forgotten art forms. And there's a sense in which it really is a spiritual discipline too. So what I say, in the class is, so often when you come across folks talking about Josephus, there's a lot of judgment which is passed, which seems to be passed by folks that haven't really spent a great deal of time listening to them. And so we try to take in the class, we start at the beginning and say, James 1:19 and 20, let every man be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. And we say, let's try to do this with Josephus. So let's be quick to listen. Let's listen to everything he has to say. Let's be slow to speak. So we're not going to pass judgment before we've actually, listened, heard him out here. And then be slow to wrath. Don't get, judgmental quickly, which is good. I think that's a great posture to just have anybody, anything, whether friend, foe. I think it's just, that's I think the best posture that we can try to have for ourselves. And, the best way that, as far as us trying to love our neighbor, it's the way that we would probably want to be treated as well if somebody was reading our writings or talking about us. And so I think what we find when we do that, and the couple of times I've gone through the seminar, I think we find Josephus to be a really valuable and trustworthy witness. To say that he's valuable and trustworthy doesn't mean that he never makes mistakes. And you're going to see this, for example, when you're looking at the Jewish war versus the antiquities. You're going to have places where he'll say one thing in the Jewish war. 20 years later, when he's writing the antiquities, he'll be talking about the same thing, and his details will seem to be a little bit different. And sometimes you can say, there's actually a way to harmonize these. And if you pull this one out and you see, okay, this is actually happening here, you can harmonize the two accounts. Sometimes you're just like, yeah, maybe he just got it wrong in the Jewish war and he's correcting it here in the antiquities. Or maybe he got it right in the Jewish war and that in the antiquities, because by the time he's doing the antiquities, he has a lot of amanuenses who are working with him. So he's got basically TAs. Maybe the TA got it wrong.
Yeah.
And that happens in real life too. You don't have to open many modern books in biblical studies to find instances of places where the TA got something wrong. Yeah. And so you can find at levels of levels of detail. Say, okay, maybe this one's off over here, or maybe you have to reconcile what Josephus says with an account you have in Tacitus or an account somewhere else, or even Josephus versus Josephus. Those things happen. You get questions, those areas. And I think that helps as well, because if you come across a spot where you have a point of tension, from something that said, say in the Gospels, and something that said in Josephus, you recognize that's not really something to lose sleep over, because every day you read Josephus, it ends up happening. It's usually Josephus versus Josephus. Having said that, I do think that he is, generally speaking, a valuable and trustworthy witness. He's not somebody you can point to places, and I could point to places where I would say, yeah, I think he probably could have been more consistent with his principles in this particular spot. Or, the way he says, hey, I'm giving you guys, the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, et cetera. He really makes a lot of, I'm trying to give you the things as they actually happen. I'm not trying to give you a some sort of whitewash, version, of the history, whether of Israel's history writ large or whether the history that he participated in. And I think that overall he does a good job of that. There's places you can point to and say, was this actually the very best way of doing that? And so, probably the clearest example of this that, our class we go back to is he's telling the history of Israel and he leaves out the golden calf event. And you think, that's kind of a big event, right? It's kind of a big deal. And I think from a standpoint of the biblical narrative, probably significant. There's things in the biblical narrative that you really want to have that. And so that's one where you think, you probably could have done that a little bit better. Having said that, that one only stands out because generally speaking, when he's talking about Israel's failures, again, either kind of throughout history or within his own time, he's usually pretty clear. He's usually pretty explicit about it. And he doesn't pull punches as far as criticizing his own people goes.
In the wars, and especially like book 6 of the wars, which is where we were looking at for the Olivet Discourse, he's straight up denouncing the leaders, the rebels, the scoundrels, he has no problem calling out the people in Jerusalem who were making life miserable. And some interpreters, though, when looking at that passage, they've said that I read, they said, but he's a little too friendly towards Rome, or a little too the fire is started by accident that ends up burning down the temple because an ember catches somewhere or something. But he's, whereas most other historians have said, no, Rome went in and burned it all down. And so that's why when I'm reading that, I don't know how to assess who's, which is more accurate or not. But that's one thing that over and over people said he in wars, at least, he errs on the side. He gives Rome the benefit of the doubt more than he gives Israel the benefit, or the leaders of Judea the benefit of the doubt. What do you think about that? Is that a fair claim, or is that one of those where you're like, no, because in other places he, goes hard in the paint against Rome?
He does go hard in the paint occasionally. So it's interesting. Josephus is, and we can say it's not just for Josephus, but for all of us. None of us write in vacuums. We all write in context, and we all write in context where we have supporters detractors, etc. And I think that the people that we respect the most are the people who have an awareness of their particular context they're writing in. It still seem to have a real level of fairness, where they aren't, sort of captured by their supporters and by their patrons, and they're not sort of blind to the good qualities that there might be, in their enemies and their detractors. Those are, I think, the folks that we respect the most. How does Josephus do? Gosh, I mean, it's a good question. It's not easy to answer because for so much of what we have, Josephus is the primary source of information.
Right.
And so we don't always have the capacity to really submit Josephus to these outside litmus tests. I will say that one thing in his favor, this is a passage that I work on quite a bit, is at the end of book 3 of the War. Josephus talks about there is a battle that's taking place up in Galilee, so the Battle of Taricheae. And there's a bunch of prisoners that have been, taken as prisoners of war. They said, hey, what, waving the white flag. They didn't really want to have any part of the Jewish war anyway. They say, let's get out of this. So this patient says, hey, if you surrender, well, that's fine, and I'm going to give you safe passage. And so they say, that sounds great to us. And so they go and they surrender. What ends up happening is Vespasian's advisors tell him, gosh, I don't know about this. If you let these guys go, these guys are Galileans. And Galileans have a reputation for setting stuff on fire. And so you might want to rethink the promise that you made to them. And he thinks about it and he's like, yeah, you're probably right. And so he breaks his promise. And what he does is he has a large number of them killed. And if you go to I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's something like 20,000 end up being killed. He has like 10,000 that are sent to, sold off in slavery. Then he has the very strongest of them sent up to Corinth, where Nero is, because Nero is trying to build or he's trying to dig the canal, which is going to connect the two sides of Greece at Corinth. And so they're basically trying to dig through this whole area. So it gets the very strongest of them, sends them over there for Nero's insane pet project. Completely breaks his promise. That's a risky thing for Josephus to be transparent about, because who is Josephus's patron by this point? Well, it's a guy whose name starts with a V and ends with Vespasian, and so he and his son Titus, being the ones who are in charge of the Roman Empire, for Josephus to be transparent about, yeah, he didn't keep to his word here, and it seems like, and he doesn't go and say, wow, Vespasian's such a bad, terrible guy, but he is transparent about Vespasian seems to do this pretty terrible thing. There's not that many writers who I think are going to have, the emperor and his son as patrons, who are going to have the courage to be honest about, an event like that. It would have been easy for Josephus just to leave that part out, and he didn't. And I think that's to his credit. And so you can see places like that where he is willing to portray even his patrons in ways which, they might have been a little bit uncomfortable with that. And, a lesser historian, I think, probably would have just left something like that out. On the flip side, I think that when it comes to the Josephus's engagement with the leadership that you have, in Judea, there's more than one thing to say. One of them, generally speaking, he can be very harsh on them. And so this is one of the things, if you look at the end of book 5, this is one of the places that if you've been reading the New Testament, this jumps off the page, because Josephus says, basically what you have that happened in this particular period is you have a generation which was the most wicked generation which had ever existed in human history.
Wait, let's pull that up. Let's actually, what do you have the reference?
Yeah, so if you
it's War, book 6.
So this is at the end of book 5.
Or 5.
And I can read the passage for you here. Let me grab the reference quickly so you know where exactly you're looking.
Yeah, so it says, it is therefore impossible to go distinctly over every instance of these men's iniquity. I shall therefore speak my mind here at once briefly. I don't know if he's ever been brief, but there we go. That neither did any other city ever suffer such miseries, nor did any age ever breed a generation more fruitful in wickedness than this from the beginning of the world. Dang.
Kind of a big deal.
That sounds familiar to Olivet Discourse readers.
It does. It definitely does. He then goes on later on to talk about this generation in relation to Sodom and Gomorrah and says, we were worse than Sodom and Gomorrah. And again, if you're thinking of, I don't know, there's this guy named Jesus that you might have heard of.
Yeah. Let me put on, I'm going to put this on screen just so I read it, but this is what I read, folks, for if you're wondering. This is Josephus 5:442 or 5:10:5, depending on which edition. But look at that again, that neither did any other city ever suffer such miseries, nor did any age ever breed a generation more fruitful in wickedness than this was from the beginning of the world.
Yeah. You want to pull up one more?
Yeah.
You go to 566.
All right.
So this is in the Loeb edition. So 5 and then 566. It's another good one where he makes the Sodom comparison directly, which again is going to remind you of the stuff that Christ says about how it's actually going to be better for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment.
Yeah. Wow. Listen to this, guys. Check this out. So, and here I cannot but speak my mind, and what the concern I am under dictates to me, and it is this. I suppose that had the Romans made any longer delay in coming against these villains, and he's talking about the Jewish rebels in Jerusalem, right? The city would either have been swallowed up by the ground opening upon them, reference to Korah, or been overflowed by water, reference to Noah, or else been destroyed by such thunder as the country of Sodom perished by. For it had brought forth a generation of men much more atheistical than were those that suffered such punishments. For by their madness it was that all the people came to be destroyed. Man.
So you can see how there is there's certain places in the Gospels where, Jesus is talking about, this wicked and adulterous generation. You think, Jesus, are you being a little hard on this generation? Is this generation really bad? Really that bad? And then you read Josephus, and Josephus is even harder on the generation than Jesus is. Actually, you know what? It seems as though they're looking at pretty much exactly the same things. And so
it seems like you have two options when you come to passages like that either that generation, like you're saying, they really were the worst generation ever of all time, or that this is stock normal figures of speech or normal language that was in use in that time that doesn't have to be pressed necessarily for literalism, but that rather they're being rhetorical in a way that was recognized. Because you got two figures saying the same thing, and Jesus and Josephus never knew each other. And so the idea would be that this is how you would talk about a wicked, terrible generation or a calamity that was coming on the city and the people, your own city, your own people. Jesus wasn't pointing fingers at other people. He was talking about his people. And so you have Josephus doing the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that probably both of those are true, to be honest, because if you look in all of the details, I think on the one hand, there's absolutely, they belong to the same rhetorical context. And so, which is really helpful for interpreting Christ's words, the apostles' words. What does it the first century Jews mean when they say things?
Yeah.
Josephus gives you more context than you know what to do with, which is fantastic. I think at the same time, if you look at the details of what it is that Josephus says when he's taking you through everything that's taking place in the Jewish war, I think, boy, yeah, this really might have been the worst generation ever. It's pretty atrocious, pretty terrible. You see God's mercy towards the generation in the way that he continues to send them, signs, prophets, all kinds of things in the lead up to what finally takes place with the destruction, and the degree to which the people themselves just continue to repeatedly harden their hearts and harden their hearts. So
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
have all
that
that.
the passage of Jesus, son of Ananus, that's crying out for years and then finally dies on the ramparts when a catapult uh, artillery hits him,
Yeah,
and like I look at that going, yeah, God didn't surprise the people with this, and Jesus in the Olivet Discourse said, when you see the eagles gather, or vultures, however you want to translate,
yeah,
know that it's near, right at the door. And his follow, Eusebius talks about, they fled. If he's to be believed, the followers of Jesus fled,
yeah,
and probably even if they weren't followers of Jesus, like normal Jews who had some fear of God in them, at least,
yeah,
probably fled as well, or at least knew to get out.
yeah,
And so the people that were there at the end were the nationalistic, blindly devoted to their cause, and they're all because they thought God was going to come in and rescue them.
yeah,
And he had
yeah,
told them over and over and over, just like when Babylon came, and the first temple was like, no, this temple is not sacrosanct
yeah,
if the people in worshiping in it aren't sacrosanct.
yeah.
Um,
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think just to go back to the original question, Sarah, Josephus doesn't pull punches as far as the wickedness of his generation. And
hmm,
it's important to say as well that Josephus, um, I think he's an astute reader of character. And so even in I think condemning the things that from his standpoint absolutely have to be condemned, he does take into account that he thinks that there's a lot of innocent victims that get brought into this. That
right.
the destruction is by no means what it had to be, and that you basically have these rebels who come in who end up on their own basically taking the city hostage.
Hmm.
His portrayal of the Jewish war is as primarily a Jewish civil war with Jews against other Jews, which the Romans then come and wipe out themselves. And
Right.
among those Jewish parties, he absolutely does not see all of them as being as wicked as the Zealots were. And I think that holds true not just in the Jewish war, but I think it holds true when you're looking at Josephus as I guess you could say, a judge of character elsewhere. Josephus on Herod is fantastic,
Hmm.
because he points out the flaws of Herod, which are many, and you read Herod's life and you realize that what Herod does with the slaughter of the innocents in Bethlehem. One is completely in character, particularly in this period of Herod's life,
Yeah.
towards the end. And then two, it's probably not like on the top 5 list of the worst things that Herod ever did. It really isn't if you see everything else that he does.
Yeah.
At the same time, Herod is not a guy without some virtues. And Josephus does a really good job of explaining how it is that you can have these two sides, which seem so at odds with one another, together in one person. And I love the way that he does that. It's one of the things that I really appreciate. You see him doing it with other biblical figures, like Samson, things like that.
Is that in Antiquities or in War?
So
Herod.
Herod actually shows up in both the Antiquities and the War.
Mm.
So it's at the end of the Antiquities, but then the first 2 books of the War, you have Herod as a big character there as well, and
Yeah.
so he is kind of a bridge figure between both of them. And like I said, it's one of the things that I really enjoy. He'll make you reassess figures. This is one of the spots where I often say you don't always think you're going to get a whole lot of points of contact between feminist criticism and Josephus.
Mm.
First century Pharisee, maybe not the place that feminists would think to be looking. Josephus's take on the Witch of Endor
Mm.
is absolutely fantastic. As far as from his standpoint, she is awesome, and we should all aspire to be like the Witch of Endor. You think, wait a second, that's a hot take. Is that a joke? And you actually go back and you read it and you see how astute he is in the way that he goes through the details of the text, the way he's not just, jumping to conclusions. And you think, gosh, that's actually a really insightful reading of this figure. And so that's one of the things I think is really
What's the
valuable.
reference? What's the reference for readers that want to go back and look at it? We won't look at it now, but
Yeah. So
where would they find that?
um, this is going to be in, let's see. This is Antiquities, Book 6.
All right, readers or viewers or listeners, there you go.
Yeah.
You want to go look up Antiquities Book 6. You can find it online. It's free.
Yep.
And you can read Josephus's take, his hot take.
Hot takes on the Witch of Endor.
I had somebody, who did I had a guest on here and we talked about that passage in particular. I think it was Paul Evans. Yeah.
Mm.
When he was on, we talked about the ghost, the witch at Endor, and Samuel's ghost, and what's happening there.
Yeah.
I'll link that in the video description if folks are interested for an Old Testament perspective. But yeah, check out Josephus's and wrestle with it for sure. What about his
few last plugs I'll throw in for Josephus?
Oh yeah.
One, within kind of modern scholarship, historical critical stuff, you talk about taking, history being really, really important. This is one of those areas where, again, we have that as we talk about doing that, but we talk about it more than we actually do it. And in some ways, I think that we're actually behind even some of our medieval predecessors. Throughout the Middle Ages, you have the Josephus's writings are so popular. There's this great quote from the Bishop of Lyon, Bishop Amelot, in the 9th century, where he complains that all of his parishioners are reading Josephus instead of the Bible. They're so into Josephus that they've just stopped reading scripture by comparison. This is in the 800s. This is supposed to be the Dark Ages, and they just love history. They love studying this stuff, and I think it's great from a historical standpoint to really try to take history seriously. But then also, I think because Josephus has been so valued throughout Christian history, this is something that I think does actually put us in touch with our own Christian roots in a way that's great. Because again, most generations historically, reading Josephus has been a big deal. It's been really, really important. And it's just a strange irony that, when it comes to kind of the modern period, we often talk about the importance of history and, doing, good historical work. But when it comes to the actual historical sources, we just can't be bothered to read them. We've got other stuff to do. So anyway, take and read. It's really good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, before we finish with Josephus, I can't not ask you about the Jesus passage, because it's a very controversial passage, and it's one of the places where people say was this actually written by Josephus? The way he talks about Jesus seems uncharacteristic. And so I think the default view, even among apologists, even among Christian apologists that I know, the default view is this is an addition to Josephus. He didn't actually write this. A later Christian came back in and wrote this. I've never done any work on that passage in Josephus. What do you know the passage I'm talking about? One.
Oh yeah.
And two, can we look at it?
Oh, let's do it. Yeah.
Which passage is it?
This is book 18 of the Antiquities.
And then,
the first thing I'll say is this isn't my primary interest in Josephus.
Right.
What I love about Josephus is all of it. And so, the apologetic stuff, I think is fun, but it's not, not the main interest.
Yeah.
That I have. And I think for some folks, either the apologetics or the anti-apologetics, whether it's because of course there's Christian apologists and there's unchristian apologists, and you have all that stuff, and those wars are really kind of prime interest for a lot of folks. And it's just not the main area that I focus in. This is in chapter 3, and so if you're looking at the Loeb edition, this is going to be 63. I won't go over all of the details of this, but what I can do is I can give you a shout out to somebody who I think is doing really good work on this. And it was cool because in the seminar, we talked through this, and when we get to book 18, we spent a lot of our day, going through the material that we have, and we came to some conclusions this past time. And when I say conclusions, I don't want to overstate that. But we came to what we thought was probably most likely as we were going through this content. And then I went to SBL, and probably the best paper at SBL that I came across. So this is, I think, the same day that I ran into you there, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. Best paper I came across is by a guy, I have his name here. So Thomas C. Schmidt. He has a paper he has a book coming out with Oxford University Press, which is focusing on this passage. And basically, his argument is this is authentic, and that the arguments against authenticity don't really hold up. Now, he's a little bit, when it comes to the one line, so hutas en ho Christos, so he was the Christ. Right. That's one where he does say, okay, maybe there's something textual going on here. And so, Jerome, for example, when he's kind of recounting the passage, he says, this one was said to be the Christ, or this one was called the Christ. Maybe It originally says this here. And so that's the one where I think he kind of goes back and forth, but I think does a really good reading, and looks both at the text itself and the history of the reception of the text. And I think gives a really, strong case for this makes sense as an authentic piece and an integral piece of the antiquities. I tend to take a different angle at it, and this might just because I'm more of a practical person, and for better or worse. I try to take almost a mechanical view of this, which is to say, if this is an interpolation, my question is, take me through the mechanics of this. Because if you just do a little thought experiment, let's say you've got one document, say it's the Declaration of Independence. There's only one Declaration of Independence that that exists. There's only one copy, but it's a publicly held document. And because it's publicly held, if I go and I break in, and I can't remember if it's in Philadelphia currently or where it happens to be. Let's say if there's only one copy of it, and I break in and I cross something out and I say, no, it's actually this other thing over here, and it's something else. There's challenges with that, because even though I've successfully interpolated the one copy that's there, within my own context, I'm not the only person who's reading, the Declaration of Independence. It's publicly held, so other people have read it, and they're going to say, "Wait a second, I don't remember that being there. How does that work?" It gets then, I think, quite a bit more difficult when you're dealing with a publicly held document for which there's not just one copy, but for which there are numerous copies. And one of the things that Josephus had going for him in having Vespasian and Titus as his patrons is that there's a lot of copies of Josephus out there. They're all over the place. And if you're thinking in terms of, is there any way that, that like Christians could have some sort of library conspiracy where they go and they, somehow go and change all of the copies everywhere? That's going to be a challenge, because you're in a period where not only is this publicly held, but Christians have, little to no power for centuries. Even by the time that you get to the, to Constantine, which is around the period of Eusebius, historians will say, I don't know, 5-10% of the empire is maybe Christian at this point. So if this is something where this is an interpolation, whether, Eusebius goes and makes it up or something like that, how do you make that work when you have a publicly held document? How do the mechanics of that work when it's not just taking one publicly held copy of something and going and sneaking something in there, but putting it somehow into every copy everywhere when you don't have authority over the books, you don't have access to the books, you're not the librarians, you're not the ones that are pulling, sort of the social strings, you have no cachet to do anything like that. How would you pull that off? And I think it's extraordinarily difficult to do. I don't know of an easy way to do it. With a privately held document, it's different. And so if you want to go through and say, or things that are said to be privately held. So if you historically, something like the donation of Constantine. How does that work? Well, it's, you're centuries after the fact, and you say, oh, we founded this thing. Nobody knew it. We had it in our private records all along. And it turns out that Constantine says that the church should get lots of money and property. Fantastic. And you can't test it. You can't go back and say, okay, well, was this thing actually around, or can we see some other copies of it? Because there aren't any. It's the opposite of what you have with Josephus. It's the opposite of what you have with this material here. And so, from my standpoint, I'm still open to the idea that this is an interpolation. I'm still open to the idea that there's some kind of change that's being made here. My question is just a practical one of how would this work? And when you have a critical scholar who can go and tell me in some sort of vaguely plausible way, some way that this could have been pulled off, I'm absolutely here to listen to it. I just haven't come across one. What I tend to find is this I don't want to be overly negative here, but there can be this very kind of like hand wavy, oh, it's an interpolation. It's an interpolation. And it's some ways it reminds you of Marcion. Honestly, in the way that Marcion, in this really lazy way, whenever he came across something that he didn't like, he'd just say, it's an interpolation. Now throw that out. That's the Jews must have snuck something in there. And you say, okay, well, can you give any like evidence for that? Is there like a manuscript that you've got, anything like that? No, I just know it's an interpolation.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you can't really get that far with somebody like that if there's no real evidence that you're dealing with.
So let me catch up viewers who are unaware of the passage, because for some viewers this is brand new, but in this section, I'll just read it so you can hear what Matt's talking about. And then you can decide with that conversation we just had in the back of your mind now, viewer, you can say, okay, what do I think? Josephus says, now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ. And that's what Matt pointed out. Ha Christos hutest hein. He was the Christ. Pardon my terrible Greek pronunciation. And then it goes on. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at first did not forsake him. For he appeared to them alive again the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold, these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him. And the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct to this day. So that's seemingly glowing. Like you would read this and go, oh, Josephus is a Christian. Some people would. So, and others would say, no, this is clearly a Christian wrote this to try to claim Josephus as one of them. And so the position you're taking is somewhere of like, this doesn't necessarily make Josephus a Christian, but we don't have evidence. Like there's no textual evidence. I mean, it's put in brackets in the critical edition. They've got this whole 2 verses in brackets. Yeah. And so what you're saying is there are no manuscripts where this verse isn't found that you know of. Right. Okay. Right. Yeah. So whatever Josephus may have believed, regardless, there's no reason textually to think that he didn't write this. Right. Right. And I think so Thomas Schmidt, who has the book, what he does a good job with, and I think he this actually builds on arguments that Whiston himself makes when he's giving an explanation of this passage. He takes the language that's here and he looks at the way that it's used, then the same words are, get used. And so paradoxon, for example, which you have to the left of the screen there, it gets translated as marvelous or wonderful works. Wonderful can be a way of translating that. It's not always wonderful. We get the English word paradox from it. And so when you have a magician, that's the kinds of things that he's doing. Magicians, the Roman world, aren't good guys. Those are bad guys. And so one of the things that Schmidt does a really good job of doing is showing that the language that gets used here, though our English rendering of it tends to be, we use pretty laudatory words.
that the language can get employed and can get translated reasonably in other ways that aren't quite as laudatory, and that don't give you as seemingly a positive spin to it. One of the other ones I'll say, and here I'm going to give a shout out to one of my students, Melvin, who wrote one of the best papers I've ever had in any class. He did a study on ha Christos hutas ein, so hutas ein ha Christos. He was the Christ. And what he does a great job of showing, he goes through all of Josephus's writings and he uses the hutas ein and says, what is Josephus doing when he says this? In every instance where Josephus says hutas ein, he's using that phrase as an identifier, which is to say, oh, hey, do you know JM? Oh, which JM are you talking about? Oh, I mean, like J.M. Smith. That's the one I'm referring to. That's this particular J.M. Every time that you look in Josephus, he's not giving, when he uses hutas ein, he's not giving his personal opinion about who this happened to be.
Right.
As far as an evaluation of anything like that, he's telling you this is the person that I'm talking about.
This
and you
one.
need that because from Josephus' standpoint in the first century, folks who have the name Jesus, it's ubiquitous. It's
there's a lot of Jesuses out there.
Yeah,
first century.
I mean, you mentioned the one that you have in Book 6 of the Antiquities, who's also predicting the destruction of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
It's even being a guy named Jesus destructing or predicting the destruction of Jerusalem. You have multiples of those. That's how common both of those things are. And so my student Melvin did a great job of showing every time you look in Josephus, when he says hutas ein, he's not trying to tell you his personal opinion about something. He's trying to tell you so that you know which person he's talking about. And so when you have a common name, this is what it is. And so the way that Josephus is making reference to the tribe of the Christianoi, well, you have to know who he's talking about for that to all be intelligible. And so there isn't really another way for him to say which Jesus is besides ha Christos hutas ein. It just makes sense. So anyway, that's a small note. If you're interested in that, like I said, that fellow Thomas Schmidt has a book coming out, and the stuff that I've read and I've come across from him, I think is really, really, really valuable. And so that should be, I think he said it's coming out in, I can't remember, like May, something like that. So have a look for it.
Well, do you know him? Is he somebody you know, or you just saw his paper?
I went to his paper. I heard it, and then I've just been emailing with him since then because I thought it was really well done.
Well, tell him if when it comes out, if he wants to come on and chat about it, let me know.
Yep,
that'd be fun.
So well, I'm here to sell other people's books.
Well, speaking of other people's books, let's talk about your book. Actually, it's the Lord's book, but you contributed to the study notes for it. The Catholic Study Bible, because you, like we said in the last time you were here on the channel, you did the notes for 1st and 2nd Maccabees in it. And we talked a little bit about 1st and 2nd Maccabees on that episode. We didn't go into detail on it, but reading Josephus gives us 1st century background and how 1st century non-Christians looked at the world and looked at the Old Testament and interpreted current events and all that stuff. So going even further back then, when you come to Maccabees, which this is where the Protestant Catholic Orthodox divide is, Protestants look at Maccabees, educated Protestants, not those who don't know, but they look at Maccabees as good Jewish literature, important historical work, should be read. We all agree Christians should read the Maccabees literature. Catholics look at 1st and 2nd Maccabees as actually scripture, part of scripture. Orthodox agree and also look at 3rd Maccabees, I believe, as scripture as well. And then is it Slavonic or is it Ethiopian that use 4th Maccabee? There's one branch, you would know better than I. There's 4 Maccabees books. 4th isn't really about Maccabees, but I think it's a philosophical defense of Judaism. I feel like David De Silva talked about the misnomer. Anyway, there are varying degrees within Christendom of how Maccabees should be viewed. So let's debate that. No, I'm kidding. So what, from a Catholic perspective,
we can have a debate. We can have a debate, and you can own me, and it can be like Disciple Dojo.
yes, destroys Catholic scholar. Take that. Take that, magisterium. No, I
love it.
I am not fit to have a debate on Maccabees and its canonicity because I have not spent the time in it that you have, certainly. So I'm a student of the Maccabean literature. Now, you and David De Silva, that'd be a fun debate, and I'll gladly moderate that because y'all are both two people that I really like. But
I love David's work. He does such good stuff. I took him on. So there's an article I wrote a few years ago, Origin on Paul's authorship of Hebrews. I do. Yeah. I basically get what everybody says that Origin says about the authorship of Hebrews, which is that only God knows, and I show everybody's interpreting Origin wrong. And I have David as one of the folks I line up in the beginning, and I said it to him as well. But I think the world of his work. He's actually when it comes to this particular period, when it comes to the Maccabean stuff, he's one of the people who I think, whether Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, who I think writes most insightfully as far as I think getting into this world and then showing how this world is the seedbed in a sense that Jesus and the early disciples are where it kind of grows up, and stuff is fantastic.
Viewers can check out the episode with David De Silva here. Also, Matt, you should come with us, dude. David and I are going to Turkey in the fall.
I heard.
We're going to see the seven churches.
I would love that. Honestly, I would be killer. I'm not sure how I can get my wife and kids to sign off on me leaving for that period of time.
Bring them with you, my friend. A family trip to Turkey.
Man, that is so tempting. I would love that so much. I've been to Turkey one time, but it was only Istanbul. I've never had a chance to go to any of the biblical sites.
We're hitting them, man. We're hitting the seven churches. David's just gonna walk around. I'll be like, "What's that rock? What's that pillar? I'm gonna drive him crazy. No,
that's amazing. You can't find many better people to learn from than him either. So
right, like the guy whose New Testament archaeology book is coming out this year is going to be taking us on a tour.
Wow.
So, but it's a good mentioning De Silva is helpful because for viewers that don't know, David and I are from the same theological tradition. We're both in Wesleyan evangelical, within the Wesleyan movement, and both I would agree with his view that the Apocrypha is, even if we don't consider it crossing the line into Holy Spirit inspired and infallible and any of those terms, that it is absolutely essential reading. And that's what I liked when I was reading the Catholic Study Bible and reading your introductions and your notes. I haven't read all your notes for First Maccabees. I actually, because I was a little bit familiar with Maccabees, the overall story, I wanted to look at Second Maccabees first in particular for my own reasons, because I knew enough to kind of get the gist of the story. But Second Maccabees has a little more spice to it. Like First Maccabees seems like good Irish English cooking, and then Second Maccabees is like, all right, now we're hitting the Cajun spices, we're adding a little bit of Southern flair. It's got a little more flavor to it. I don't know if that's my impression. You wrote the study notes, you could tell me what you think. But what I want to do is you tell readers now, we've done Josephus, why we should be reading Maccabees, and not just why. I mean, you could say why very quickly, but then how should we be reading Maccabees? Because these are books that, especially if they're unfamiliar, they're daunting. So hopefully you're enjoying this so far. Stay tuned for the next episode in this series. We're going to continue our discussion with Dr. Matthew Thomas. Check the video description below for links for some of the works that we've mentioned. And if you appreciate these type of long-form discussions, unapologetic biblical nerdery, we would love for you, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. That really, really does help us to continue to do even more of this. That'll do for now. Stay tuned for the next episode where we continue our discussion with Dr. Matthew Thomas. We'll see you back here then. In the meantime, as always, keep training.